I was kind of raised with this, like, belief, I guess you could call it, that Jesus came down to earth, did these amazing works, miracles, the Son of God, and then was crucified, died, rose from the dead, ascended to heaven, and then in between then and now, we were just kind of left with, like, this waiting game, waiting for Jesus to come back, right? Not the case. Okay, my understanding has evolved immensely since then, and that's what Alive and Thriving is all about. It's all about this advanced Christian teaching, alright? The Word of God that you have to seek out. It's all around you at all times, but when you really start to look for it, you find it, okay? So, what I am reading from is a collection of books called Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. This is the cover right here. It's a series of books by Baird T. Spalding, and this chronicalizes masters who learned from the lineage of Jesus Christ and applied all of the things that Christ really taught his disciples. Long story short, it's how to be like Christ. How to get out of your own way so that you too can be the living embodiment of Christ consciousness. And for whatever reason, my camera decided to unfocus there. That is the mission behind Alive and Thriving. It's to help any spiritual soul who is seeking to be like Christ. And so without further ado, let's dive right in to where we left off in chapter 10 of Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East. Chapter 10. Let's scoot over just a little bit to be a little bit centered here. When we returned to headquarters, we found all in readiness for crossing the mountains. After a day's rest and a change of porters and animals, we started on the second stage of our journey, this time actually to cross the Himalayas. The happenings of the next 20 days were of but passing interest. Emil talked to us on the realization of the Christ consciousness. He said, "It is through the power of our own mind or thought action that we are able to bring forth or realize the Christ consciousness. Through the power or process of thought, we can transmute and evolve our bodies, or our outer conditions and surroundings. Through recognition of this Christ consciousness within ourselves, so that we will never experience death, nor any change called death. This is done wholly through man's power to visualize, idealize, conceive, and bring forth that which he gazes upon." Oh, how true it is that you look up at the camera and then lose your place in the book. Alright, this is done by first knowing or perceiving or having faith that Christ is within ourselves. Seeing the true meaning of Jesus' teaching, holding our bodies one with God, made in the image and likeness of God, and merging that body into the perfect God body just as God sees us. We have idealized, conceived, and brought forth into manifestation the perfect God body. We are born again truly of and in the spirit kingdom of God. Now, according to Baird T. Spalding, excuse me while I itch my eye, According to Baird T. Spalding, during his travels in the Far East, this is exactly what these masters, Emil being first and foremost of the people that he spends his time with, were and are now. If you take and you read these books and you fully accept what is within them, and with a grain of salt, of course, but I think at a certain point the seeker really does kind of abandon doubt and skepticism, and when that takes place, you align yourself with this teaching. It's definitely not for someone who is not seeking it. It's for all people. But the person that's ready to hear these words, they're going to hear them. It's like, for those who have ears to hear, let them hear. For those who have eyes to see, let them see. And that's what you get with this. Alright, so Emil is talking from Christ consciousness, or Christ consciousness is speaking through Emil. It is in this way that we can return all things to the universal mind substance from which they sprang, and bring them back or return them perfect into outer form or manifestation. Then, by holding them in their pure, spiritual, perfect state, the vibrations are lowered and the things we wish to create come forth in perfect form. In this way, we can take every false belief, every old condition, every sin, all of our past life. It does not matter what it has been, how good or seeming bad. It does not matter what mountain or false belief or doubt and unbelief or fear we or anyone else has erected about us or in our paths. And we can say to them all, I now return you to the great ocean of universal mind substance, from which all things come forth, and where all is perfection, and from which you sprang, there to be again resolved into the elements from which you were created. I now return you or bring you back from that pure substance as perfect and pure as God sees you, and hold you always in that absolute perfection. We can say to ourselves, I now realize in the old order of things that I brought you forth imperfectly, and you manifested imperfectly. Realizing the truth, I now bring you forth perfect as God sees you. You are reborn perfect, and it is so. We must realize that the inner alchemist, God within, has taken hold of this and has transmuted, refined, and perfected that which seemed imperfect, that which was brought forth and are now returning. We should realize that it is refined, perfected, and transmuted, just as our bodies are refined, perfected, and returned to us as God's body, joyously perfect, beautifully free. Finally, we should realize that this is the perfect Christ consciousness in all and for all. This is hid with Christ in God. The morning of July 4th found us at the summit of the pass. Emil had told us that evening, or Emil had told us the evening before, that he felt we had earned a holiday, and that he saw no more fitting time than the 4th to celebrate. At breakfast, Emil began by saying, "This is the 4th of July, the day you celebrate the birth of your independence. How fittingly expressive is this day. I feel that all of you must have more or less confidence in us. Therefore, I'm going to speak freely, and in a few days we shall be able to prove to you conclusively that the statements I am making are true. We love to call your country America, and all of its inhabitants Americans. You will never know the joy these few moments bring to me on this day of such import, to be able to talk with you and see eye to eye with a small group of Americans who were, with one exception, born in that great land. Let me say that it has been the privilege of some of us to have beheld your country long before Columbus started on his memorable expedition. There had been other attempts at discovery, but they had come to naught. Why? Simply because of the absence of that one God-given quality, faith. The one who had the courage and faith to see and to carry out the vision had not yet awakened. The moment that soul awoke to the realization that the earth was round and there must be land on the other side equal to that already known, we could see that another great historical epoch had begun to unfold. So, in that paragraph, just to sum it up briefly, the great historical epoch that Emil is talking about beginning is the shift in consciousness in humanity to realize, to take it on faith, that the world was round, that the world was not flat. So in Columbus specifically, that he could sail and not fall off of the face of the earth. And you have to think that this was a very real superstition and basically expounded scientific belief by the science of the time, by the knowledge of mass at the time. There was no reason for anybody to think that the world wasn't flat because they had yet to leave the ground and fly like birds or anything like that to be able to see otherwise. They just had their two eyes to basically look out and see an horizon, and just the visual perception of that alone was enough to deter people from really setting forth on these great oceanic voyages. Now, of course, we know today that Columbus was not the person that discovered, quote-unquote, discovered the United States of America. That Native Americans were already living here, that they had come across the Great Land Bridge, most likely, from Siberia to this place we call North America, millennia, generations, thousands of years before, and that Vikings had in fact made their way from wherever they had come from, through Greenland area, Nova Scotia area, and then into North America. There is actual Celtic runes and carvings and things of this nature that prove that Columbus was not the first person from the European continent to set foot on the North American continent. Now, back to the reading. Who but the great omnipotent one, who sees all things, could have awakened that little grain of faith in the soul of Columbus? What were his first words as he stood before the Queen that day, not recognizing the highest power? Dear Queen, I am firmly convinced that the earth is round, and I wish to sail forth and prove it. I do not know whether you recognize it, but those words were God-inspired, and Columbus was recognized as one who had the determination to carry out what he undertook. Then, the long sequence of events started to unfold, which was shown us years before, not in its entirety, but enough so that we had been able to follow. Of course we dreamed of the almost unbelievable wonders to be accomplished and recorded in the seemingly short span of years that had passed. But those of us that have been privileged to live through it now fully realize that far greater wonders are in store for your great nation. We feel that the time has come for your nation to awaken to its true spiritual import and we wish to do all we can to help you to this realization. It appears that their interest in us was prompted by their great desire to have America accept Christ consciousness and realize her possibilities. They know that her inception was truly spiritual, and through that fact, she is destined to be a leader in the spiritual development of the world. Now, most of us alive now have no conception of what the United States was in its inception. To put it very briefly, the whole point of an American republic, there were many points, but one of the biggest ones from the truly spiritual aspect, nature, and or perspective of the founding men and women who led this new nation into reality, was to maintain distance from the wars and the strife that Europe periodically, almost as if by clockwork, put themselves into. What do I mean? I mean that it was like clockwork that every 40 to 60 years there would be some tumultuous event in Europe called a war. You had the Napoleonic Wars, you had World War I, then World War II. It just seemed as though that continent was destined to upheave peace regularly. So the founding fathers, the men and women, the great minds that built this nation, said we should not be involved. We should not get involved lest we wish to not have peace. Now that's easy enough, right? That's easy enough to conceptualize and to put your get your mind around. But just think about that for a second, because today the United States of America is the most interventionist country in the world, with the largest military that there is. But in its conception, the United States was very benevolent in its outlook and its mission statement that we should not get involved in foreign affairs. We should trade and do business, but when it comes to conflict, we should have nothing to do with it. Emil continued, Think of this made possible by the little seed of faith planted in the consciousness of one man they allowed to develop. What has happened? Can you realize it? Columbus, in his day, was thought to be an impractical dreamer. And are we not all coming to the place where we believe and know that the dreams of yesterday are but the realities of today? For who has accomplished anything who was not a so-called dreamer? In reality, were his visions dreams? Were they not ideals in the great universal mind, God, conceived in the soul of the one who brought them forth as a great truth? Did he not set forth upon an uncharted sea, visioning clearly in his own consciousness a land beyond? Whether he saw the land and prominence to be attained by the land, or even the name of America to be given to it, I do not know. In all probability, that was left for those that followed to work out. The point is, was it not first a dream or a vision? We already see some of the wonders unfolded, but we can only visualize the wonders yet to follow as the result of that one vision. In this way, we may recount the many visions that have helped to make the world a better place in which to live. Is not this the way God manifests or expresses through all, the one that has already brought forth, is the one that has the greater faith in God, either consciously or unconsciously. Think of that soul setting out upon what was then an uncharted sea. The hardships, the trials, the discouragement, with but one thought uppermost in mind, the goal. Then, events led on and always up to the day when that little handful embarked on the Mayflower, seeking freedom to worship God in their own way. Think of it, in their own way. Taken in the light of the Spirit and subsequent happenings, does the real truth come? Did they not build greater than they thought? Can you not see the hand of the great omnipotent one above it all? Then came the dark days when it seemed as though the first colonies would be snuffed out. But what God has set his hand to must triumph. Still later came the great day of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and choosing whether either God or oppressor. Who prevailed? Who must always prevail? Whether you realize it or not, the struggles of that little body of men in those memorable days and the act of affixing their names to that document is one of the greatest epics since that of the advent of Jesus into the world. Then came the strokes of the Independence Bell. Believe it or not, the first strokes of that bell were known to us as truly as if we had been standing beneath it. That bell magnified and sent out the vibrations that emanated from that little center until someday they will penetrate the deepest and darkest corners of the whole earth and thus enlighten the darkest consciousness. Look at the trials and vicissitudes that led up to that event. Was not the great child born that day? See the great souls that dared to come forth to sponsor the child. Had they lost heart, see what might have happened? They did not falter or lose heart. What did happen? This greatest nation of all the earth was born. Her trials and tribulations since unfoldment of that great soul. Her trials and tribulations since bespeak what? Are they not closely allied with the unfoldment of that great soul, Jesus of Nazareth? Cannot those that signed the Declaration of Independence that day be likened unto the wise men from the east who saw the star symbolizing the birth of the babe in the manger, the Christ consciousness in man? Did they not perceive the star just as truly as those of old? Camera had to focus. Calling to mind the words of that declaration, can you doubt that every word was God-inspired? Stop a moment and think. Is there a parallel in all history? Is there or was there ever a document like it from which it could have been copied? Is there any doubt that it came direct from the universal mind substance? Is there any doubt that it is a part of the great creative plan being brought into manifestation? Is there any doubt that it is a successive stage in the working out of that great plan? Is there any question that the watchword e pluribus unum, one out of many, or unity out of diversity and multiplicity, was adopted during the successive stages of evolution of the Spirit of Truth? It certainly did not emanate mechanically from man's mortal mind. Then the emblematic phrase, "In God we trust." Does not that show the most sanguine faith or trust in God, the creator of all? Then the choice of the eagle, the bird which represents the highest aspiration, as the emblem. It shows that these men were deeply spiritual, or they builded better than they knew. Can you doubt for a moment that all were guided by the whole of the God Spirit in creative action? Does it not bespeak that America is destined to be the guide of the whole world? Consider the history of your nation. There is not a parallel in the history of the nations of the whole earth. Can you not see each succeeding step leading up to its fulfillment? Can you believe that there is any other than a mastermind working out its unfoldment? Can you doubt that it is the great omnipotent God guiding its destiny? Just as the mustard seed, although it is among the smallest of seeds, has the faith to know that within itself it has the power to express the mustard plant, the greatest of all herbs. For when it is grown, it becomes a tree, and the birds may come and lodge in the branches thereof. Just as a seed knows that within itself it has the power to express the greatest, so must we know that we have the power within ourselves to express the greatest. In giving this parable, it was the quality instead of the quantity of faith that Jesus referred to. If ye have the faith as a grain of mustard seed, and that faith becomes knowing, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Just so the frailest poppy seed and the mightiest banyan tree, the bulb, the plant, the tree seed, all know that they can express the greatest. Each has an exact picture or representation of what it must express. So must we have an exact picture within ourselves of what we desire to express. Then there must be an inner perfecting wrought by hourly preparation, and this perfection will come forth. No flower ever bursts into full bloom without this perfecting inner urge. A moment before the bud was confined within the supple sense of self, but when this inner perfection is complete, the flower bursts forth, beautiful. As the seed that falls into the ground must first give forth from self in order to grow, develop, and multiply, so must we first give forth from self to unfold. That's one more time. As the seed that falls onto the ground must first give forth from self in order to grow, must first give forth from self in order to grow, develop, and multiply, so must we first give forth from self to unfold. As the seed must first burst its shell in order to grow, so must we burst our shell in order to grow. So must we burst our shell of limitation to begin our growth. When this inner perfection is complete, we must come forth beautiful, the same as the flowers. As with an individual, so with a nation. Can you not see that with the Christ consciousness fully developed in such a nation, whatever is undertaken by it or by its people must work out for good to all? For the very root or heart of all government is the consciousness of those governed. Great mistakes have been made by your nation in the ongoing, because you have not realized your spiritual import, and the vast majority are still deep in the material. I fully realize that great souls have guided the destiny of your nation. I also realize how those great souls have been appreciated until they have passed on. I also realize how little those great souls have been appreciated until they have passed on. The way has been jagged and bushy, a hard way, because man in his limited concept thus far let only the mortal concept build the way. See what wonders he has accomplished, but see what wonders could have been accomplished had the fuller, deeper spiritual meaning been understood and applied. In other words, had the Christ been placed at the helm of your ship of state, and could all have known the truth as Jesus did, that the Christ is in every man and woman, and that all are one, what wonders would stand revealed today? I behold the same glory yet to be, as soon as the deep spiritual meaning of E pluribus unum is understood. Do you not realize that it is one of the first great laws of God, that all expressing through the many, one of all and for all? Consider every nation that has been founded. Those founded on true spiritual perception have endured the longest, and would have endured forever had not materialism been allowed to creep in and gradually undermine the whole structure until they fell by their own abnormal weight, or were consumed by the misuse of the law that gave them birth. By the fall of each, what has happened? The principle or God part was perceived until in each succeeding failure we can trace a gradual rise or upward ongoing in each successive stage, until finally all must end in God, one of many. My brothers and sisters, it does not need a prophet to bring you to a realization of this. See what a nation Spain was at the time of Columbus setting forth on his voyage of discovery, and for a short time afterwards, and see now what is happening. In a short time, she will be at war with her own child. Then you will see what a helpless, impotent nation she is, hardly able to totter into a good fight or out of a poor one. To what can you attribute her impotency? It is utter devitalization. It is not always thus with a nation or an individual. Is it not always thus with a nation or an individual? When the body, form, or structure has been satiated, whether by greed or passion, the results are the same. There may be a short time of seeming prosperity and success, but this is short-lived. Then the decrepit, emaciated, and wasted form bears evidence, as does the halting, uncertain step of the old. Whereas, had they Had they conserved and developed their spiritual power, they would be as resilient and buoyant at 500, 5,000, or 10,000 years, or eternally, as they were in the heyday of their ascendancy. How we look forward to the age which is dawning, the age of crystal, the pure white light of dawn gradually breaking, and in a short space of time all will see the full blazing glory of this approaching day. Then there will be no darkness, no limitation. Does not this suggest that there must be eternal progress? If not, all must return to all must return to that from which it sprang, the universal substance. All must progress or go backwards. There is no halfway point, no stopping place. When your nation does recognize its true estate or mission and joins hands with the Spirit and expresses as God wishes it to express, or lets the Spirit unfold from within, we can see for your great nation a marvel far transcending the power of any human tongue to describe. There is no question but that it took the great strong beak and talons of the eagle to hold your nation together during its development. But when the true spiritual light comes, it will be seen that the dove is mightier than the eagle, and the dove will protect what the eagle now guards. Look at the words on the coin you send into every avenue of world trade. In God we trust, and e pluribus unum, one composed of many, the very slogan of spirit when the dove replaces the eagle on the life medium of such a nation. Whew! The talk ended here, and Emil went on to say that he would leave us for a short time, as he wished to go to meet some of the others who were assembling in a village 200 miles away. He said he would rejoin us at a small village 60 miles away, at which we would arrive in about 4 days. He then disappeared with 4 others. He then disappeared and, with 4 others, joined us 4 days later in a small village on the frontier. Okay. As you can tell, the way in which Baird writes is of an era past, or, as is common in my field of study, the way that philosophers like to write. With flowery language and, anyways, it's just a little tough to follow sometimes. But I won't give a long commentary on what we just read. Suffice to say, one very important thing comes from that chapter, and that it is governance is a reflection or an outcropping, an embodiment of the soul, the collective soul of the people governed. Governance in and of itself is not an entity. Government is not something that is, how best to put this? It's not something that you can just give away your power to. Okay, it is an extension of your power, of the collective spirit that is the nation in which it represents. Alright, that's why, to painstaking lengths, the Founding Fathers penned the legal guidelines by which this nation was to continue, because they understood this concept. They understood that the entity, if you will, of government was like a balloon, in that it only expands, it's only healthy, it's only capable of having form because the will of the people, the soul of the people, are channeling and or blowing life force energy into it. Now in our day and age, as we watch this political theater that takes place in our country, there are many who would wish to just take decision-making power from the people and give it over to the government. But if we take this enlightened way of thinking and talking, this message that Emil is sharing, this is from Christ consciousness and being given to the world, then we can really start to get our minds around what takes place at the governmental level is a reflection of the United States soul. And of course, as with any human body, it will operate best if things are working in harmony. That is, the digestive system is healthy, the heart is healthy, and the mind is healthy. Balance there in the human body creates a really well-working system. Therefore, it must be the case with our nation. We must be balanced. We must follow divine law so that we can have the most prosperous nation possible. And Emil makes no qualms about saying that it must be Christ consciousness at the helm of the ship. It must be that which we are collectively striving forward towards. We must have that ideal of Christ that is our guiding light. Now, like I said, I'm not going to do a long commentary on this, but suffice to say that this is a wonderful thing to meditate on. How our governance, our government, is a reflection. It is us. We are it. And if you start to identify areas, as you maybe take a global, a national political perspective, if you start to identify things, people, movements that want to take essentially your sovereign God-given rights and power, the life force energy that animates you and your body, the soul, and says that that's not the most important thing, that what is the most important thing is government, then you know that that person, one, is not coming from an aligned with spirit perspective. And I would caution you to be weary to the utmost of any policies and things that they would have enacted or that they promote or advocate for. The power is and always will be within you. And at the national level, the power is and always will be with the people. We must always remember that as a nation, that we, the people, are the nation. We, the people, the United States citizens, are the United States. We represent us. We choose individuals to go and represent us. They are not the embodiment of power. It is us as a collective family that are the embodiment of the power that comes directly from Source. Namaste.